Thank you for waiting. We are now starting the symposium, Diversity in Traffic Culture and Unsafe Behavior of the 6th Global Interactive Forum on Traffic and Safety 2020. First, on behalf of the host, Professor Kazuhiko Takeuchi, President of IATSS EATS will give an opening address.
Thank you very much for your introduction. My name is Kazuhiko Takeuchi. I'm a president of the International Association of Traffic and Safety Sciences, so-called EATS. And I would like to take this opportunity to make an opening address for the 6th Global Interactive Forum on Traffic and Safety, or GIFTS in short, Symposium on Diversity in Traffic Culture and Unsafe Behavior. I would also like to provide a warm welcome to everyone joining us in the webinar today, and also extend my sincere appreciation to the International Road Federation, Université Gustave Eiffel, the World Bank, and Japan International Cooperation Agency, or JICA, for their valuable support in making this symposium possible. Ever since it was established in 1974, EATS has sought the creation of an optimum transportation system through research focused on traffic and associated safety. During this time, traffic conditions around the world have undergone immense changes, and there are more than 1.3 million traffic accident fatalities annually, which will unfortunately increase further in the future, in particular in developing countries. This is an urgent issue that needs to be addressed along with further efforts in a broad range of fields, including climate change, mitigation, adaptation, sustainable urban development, and rectifying social disparities. In light of such circumstances, in 2014, our 40th anniversary, our association developed 4 policies to focus on over the long term. The first of these is global safety, with the aim of making further efforts on a global scale to improve traffic safety. The second is placing greater importance on the field of traffic culture, as we are now willing to discuss today, noting that there are different types of regional and national development, as well as the social characteristics. The goal of this policy is to establish effective measures for traffic culture based on these social and cultural backgrounds. Until recently, EATS had been taking an interdisciplinary approach as it aimed to accumulate a comprehensive range of knowledge spanning multiple fields of expertise. Thus, the third policy will be to adopt a transdisciplinary approach that, in addition to academic field, involves experts and planners of administrative and real-world scenarios encompassing anything to do with traffic. Lastly, the fourth area we are focuses on is the need for ongoing and cooperative discourse involving people not only from Japan, but from around the world who have different values and cultures. We recognize the need to create opportunities where everyone can share their ideas on how to address various challenges. As I outlined beforehand, EATS views traffic culture as a way of encompassing the various traffic policies in different countries and regions and how to best practice the goals of such policies. We believe that it is vital to make a proactive approach for discussions to develop measures that are effective amidst such a broad range of values. Thank you very much once again to everyone for playing an active role in today's symposium. I welcome all of you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Now, Dr. Yuto Kitamura, Chairman of ES International Forum Committee, will explain the objectives of the sixth symposium.
Thank you very much, Chair. I am Yuto Kitamura of the University of Tokyo and also the Chairman of the International Forum Committee at the IATS. I'd like to thank everyone for tuning in today as I express my appreciation on behalf of the International Forum Committee. As President Takeuchi already outlined right now, our association's goal is to realize a society with safe and secure transportation. And in order to achieve this goal, IATS has been promoting interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary approaches. We strongly believe that the organizing this symposium every year is the one way to encourage such initiatives. So far, we have held 5 symposiums since 2015, which have the themes such as various traffic cultures rooted in each region, traffic culture and safety, public transport and traffic safety, thinking about traffic safety from the intercultural aspects, and socio-economic development and traffic safety. By focusing on traffic culture, we have discussed these topics on a wide variety of levels, ranging from policy to street levels. In order to think more deeply about how to achieve a society with safe and secure transportation. Through the course of these dialogues, we cover the topics related to transportation as a public arena from various angles. And we had a very fruitful discussions for the last 5 forums. In these forums, we invited experts from many countries, including the United Kingdom, the Netherlands, Sweden, Denmark, India, South Africa, and Egypt. As well as we invited experts from international organizations, such as the World Health Organizations and Asian Development Bank. These experts shared with us insights based on their experience from a broad range of perspectives. Over the past 5 years, I believe IATS has created a valuable platform for which to discuss ways of harnessing these types of international networks. The International Forum Committee aims to maximize the potential of this platform to further enhance the functionality of this forum into the future. So we believe that this GIFT symposium is a wonderful opportunity for achieving the goal of sharing and distributing knowledge and experiences on a global scale. I think it is important to think about the way a safe and secure transportation culture should be developed as a baseline for future discussions. So as a way for the IATS to contribute to the international community by utilizing international forum like this GIFTS, we are very much looking forward to have fruitful discussions this year as well. We need to think deeply about what situations are occurring around the world and what types of challenges we are facing. and what experts can do or should be doing to tackle these challenges. I think the role that gifts will play as a venue for lively discussion is certainly a significant one. So today I am so honored and happy to have a guest from around the world who are involved in tackling the challenges of traffic safety, both academically and from a practical perspective. So we have 4 experts. Professor Nicholas Ward from Montana State University. We have Professor George Giannis from the National Technical University of Athens. We have Dr. Soren Job from the World Bank, and Dr. Suzanne Zamataro from the International Road Federations. We have such wonderful professionals being guests, and we feel very honored to have them today. So today's symposium, like the previous ones, we will be focusing on the concept of traffic culture. By doing so, these 4 guest speakers will be providing their insights with a range of specific examples from a broad theoretical framework, including the importance of developing and implementing integrated systems for traffic safety, as well as case studies of unsafe behavior and how to combat them. By analyzing topics from an academic approach as well as a practical approach, the goal of GIFT is to gain new insights that are seamless blend of both perspectives. Both perspectives means academic perspectives and practical perspectives. And then we are very much looking forward to some open and vibrant discussion today. In closing, I'd like to mention that this is a year where the coronavirus pandemic forced everyone to make significant changes to their usual behavior. While we may not be able to cover topics that are directly related to preventing infections, we need to keep in our mind the many different scenarios that are playing out around the world while discussing the ways to develop a safe and secure society. And we look forward to the broad range of topics that our panelists will be covering today. These are the main points that we will cover in today's symposium, and I very much look forward to learning from their insights and experience of the guest speakers. So we have a limited amount of time today, so I now would like to hand over the microphone to the speakers. Before doing that, I'd like to express my sincere appreciation to all the viewers for taking part in today's symposium. Thank you.
Thank you. We are now going to start the lectures. This year, we invited 4 lectures from abroad. We will hold a Q&A session during the panel discussion. Please note that there is no Q&A session at the end of each lecture. The first lecture is Dr. Soren Job, head of the Global Road Safety Facility and Global Lead Road Safety with the World Bank. He is accompanied today by Mr. Kazuyuki Neki, Junior Professional Officer at the World Bank. Dr. Job, please start.
Thank you for that. Thank you for the introduction. And thank you to the International Association for arranging this seminar, and congratulations on it being the 6th and on the valuable work that you're doing. As a comment, I did want to say, I really agree with President Takeuchi and Chairman Kitamura on the comment about the range and the perspective of how you are seeing the term culture, so that it encapsulates policies and much more than policy. I think that's a really important point for us to highlight. And I also want to thank my colleague Kazuneki for his valuable inputs to this. We could go to the next slide, please. So as an overview, we wanted to just make several points at a broad level with examples from around the world. First, I think culture, race, politics, location, climate, the economy of the country have very complex interrelationships, and so they're not easily separated. And to some extent, I think we have to accept they're not easily separated, but we can still examine how we make improvements based on all of them. And cultural differences create large differences in road user behaviour, but there are many underlying causes for those. And we want to really highlight that one of the main causes for those variations in behaviour is the way we manage road safety. And therefore, the cultural influences of road safety management itself become incredibly important to understanding cultural variation. So we're going to just go through each pillar and consider how that pillar of activity influences the behaviour through the culture that people perceive. We could go to the next one, please. To defend that, first of all, there's some beautiful psychological research on this that shows that we, as societies, we focus a great deal on personality. So personality influences the way we do things, how much we talk, how confident we are, etc. But actually, the situation we're in determines much more of the variation of our behaviour than our personality. So, you know, if we say people are talkative or not talkative, but actually almost everyone is talkative in some social situations when they're out having dinner, but very quiet in more sombre situations. So the situation still influences our behaviour more than our personality. And therefore, the situation which road safety management creates on roads is a huge determiner of on-road behaviour. Next slide, please. And here are some examples. And even though these are photos I've taken of very dangerous behaviours, they still vary a lot from country to country and culture to culture. So up the top is perhaps the most extreme I've seen, where these people are standing in the road, blocking the traffic so that one of them can step into the middle of the lane of traffic, put out their hand and step back as a way of actually practicing bullfighting in the traffic. It's an extraordinary piece of culture, but we see these kinds of extreme cultural variations across many countries. And these are just a few examples of that kind of extreme behaviour, which obviously creates huge risk for road safety. Next slide, please. It's also important to consider where cultural variation occurs. And the cultural variation occurs very substantially within countries as well as between countries. And this is influenced by race. So, for example, in Australia, where I'm from, the Indigenous people of Australia, who only make up a few % of the population, still have a much higher crash death rate than the rest of the population. And that really reflects various cultural issues, but also situational issues, the same in New Zealand and the same in many other countries. Religion has an important impact. For example, for some religions, there is a required headdress, which means you simply cannot wear a motorcycle helmet. And then I think one of the others that I think is becoming neglected to a certain extent is there is really a cultural difference growing between rural and metropolitan areas within many countries. And typically, rural dwelling people have many times the death rate in crashes per population of urban dwelling people. And so that becomes disturbing. But of course, it is also, again, to do with the circumstance. There's less law compliance on rural roads, but that's because there's less enforcement. There are higher speeds, so there is a more severe impact of crashes and emergency response is slower. So there are many complex causes of these differences in culture we can see and how they affect road safety. Next slide, please. It also creates differences in who manages road safety, and police forces give us a good guide to this. So, for example, in the United States, because it's managed at the local government level, there are over 18,000 separate police forces doing road safety. In Brazil, there are over 5,000 separate police forces at the federal level, the state level, and the municipal level. But in some countries, there's just one, a national police force. And then other countries are kind of in between. So in Australia, for example, there are just the 8 state territory police forces. So the culture of the way the society is set up and the way the governance is set up actually determines who manages road safety and how complex it is to get them to manage it at a national level. Next slide, please. One of the things that jumps out when we talk about this is people say, well, actually, it's a lot to do with the economy of the country. And this slide shows the line of best fit and the dot points of various countries showing their fatality rate per 100,000 population versus their GDP per person. And it shows that there is a relationship. Indeed, as countries go from very low income per person up to moderate, the crash rate, the death rate rises rapidly and then gradually decreases as countries become more wealthy. But if we go to the next slide, please. I've just picked out some examples to just highlight, even within very similar economic states of countries, there are huge variations of the level of road safety. And that's to do with culture and various other complex features. So I think we should strongly resist a view that the economy of the country is the main driver of road safety performance. It's not. There are many other major drivers, and culture is a key one of them. Next slide, please. Culture has fundamental impacts on road safety management, and here are a series of features which really encourage strong management. If there is a high societal value on human life, and if there is a strong scientific evidence background, and I love the name of GIFTS, including safety sciences at the end to really highlight how important that is, that prevention rather than punishment after the event is fundamentally supported, societal responsibility is valued, and government and laws are credible, and so enforcement is feasible. A high level of education and well-regulated public transport all improve road safety management. On the other hand, a number of other features of countries which are influenced by their culture and are part of their culture can actually retard effective road safety management. If, for example, if individual freedom is prioritised over any societal value, or common sense is the basis on which we make judgments rather than scientific evidence, if there is substantial public corruption, and if the government's management is extremely fragmented across many, many different levels of government, and private sector responsibility is low, and there are fatalistic beliefs, then all of these things will actually retard good road safety management. Next slide, please. I'm going to talk very briefly now about each of the pillars of road safety. So let's look at behaviour. Next slide, please. So I've just picked out here some fundamental differences in countries in terms of their national seatbelt law, but within economies. So the first three are all high-income countries, and here we can see Japan has a seatbelt law covering front and rear passengers. But on the other hand, Antigua and Barbuda has no seatbelt law. The United States has variations by state, which may generally, but don't always include the rear seat. Then again, within middle-income countries, we see the same level of variation from complete coverage to front only to no coverage at all. And even within low-income countries, we see the same level of variation. Some have complete coverage within the law, some have no coverage, some have front seats only. So it's to highlight that the way we manage it isn't simply determined by the economy, but these fundamental differences in law will create huge differences in the extent of seatbelt wearing. Next slide, please. Another very important example, which is culturally influenced, is, for example, the role of random breath testing for alcohol. Now, random breath testing has been adopted in Australia and New Zealand. It was adopted on a state basis in the state where I was working at the time, New South Wales. When we adopted random breath testing, it created the second largest reduction in deaths from year to year in our crashes in the history of the state, the largest being compulsory seatbelt use. But it exists as a law in Brazil, for example, but the driver can refuse to take the test. On the other hand, in some countries, like the United States, it's illegal. It's regarded as an unreasonable search. So that kind of cultural view of the protection of freedom actually means some laws are possible and in countries where they're not possible in other countries. So clearly that's a huge cultural impact on how we manage road safety. Next slide, please. If we go to the next one, if we look at speed, we also find large variations. We could go to the next slide, please. So, but what we should appreciate is very often the media will say, well, people don't want speed management. But if you look around the world, there are many places where there is insufficient speed management. So people actually go out and build their own speed humps by putting big ropes across the road or putting big dirt piles across the road. And these are some examples. So often there is a misperception of the cultural value of speed management. Next slide, please. There are also huge cultural variations in the extent to which we can use speed cameras, which I'll just go through very quickly, but these vary from they can be used freely in a country to they can't be used at all in the country to they can be used but you can't take a photo of the driver or any occupant. So we have all of these variations around privacy values and versus public health values that are influencing the extent to which we can effectively manage speeds on our roads. Next slide, please. Then there are also complex variations around warning signs. So these warning signs from Latin America show that, you get warnings so often as you approach a speed camera that it's really designed just to limit speeds around that camera, whereas in other countries they're hidden. And that will also create very large variations in the extent to which speed camera enforcement is effective at a very local level or at a broad level across the network. Next slide, please. In addition, there are very large variations in default urban speed limits and default rural speed limits. So if you just look at the numbers in bold, they are the variation from the highest default limit to the lowest default limit within high-income countries, within middle-income countries, within low-income countries. And we can see that even within the economy of the country, there are huge variations in the safety delivered by the speed limits which are set, even if they're obeyed. And next slide, please. If we look at vehicles, again, we see significant variations across cultures. We could go to the next one, please. And these are just a few photos of the obvious. So, these are, that photo on the left is the school bus in various places in Southeast Asia. There are actually 11 people on that little motorcycle tuk-tuk going to school versus an incredibly safe school bus designed in high-income countries, such as the United States with effective stop signs, etc. So vehicles have a huge impact on the safety we deliver. And next slide, please. Another one of the variations that is really noticeable is child labour. and this is a frightening but important thing for us to consider in road safety. So in the countries we're used to, in Japan, Australia, the US, in Europe, etc., well, children go to school. And so the way we protect children is with school buses, like I just showed, and lowering speed limits around schools, etc. But in some countries in West Africa, 25% of the population aged from 7 to 15 are in work. They're not going to school, they're working. And this is just one example of a very small child riding a donkey around public roads to sell firewood. And that means protecting children in those countries is a completely different thing from our focus on schools. Next slide, please. Public transport and the level of regulation of it also varies hugely. And these are just some example photos from Africa, where they have these trucks operating as buses where everyone just piles in and hopes nothing happens, to Southeast Asia, where you have people who mock together a little tractor and various bits of equipment so that they can get people to pay to be ridden into town, versus your top quality regulated bus and train systems. That also creates large variations in the quality of safety we have, but also those things in themselves create cultural variation. It's hard to tell someone they must wear a seatbelt when they see people riding around in these different forms of transport, which apparently look safe, but actually create disastrous crashes. And next slide, please. Road infrastructure, of course, is also another huge variation, and this is the situation in which people use the road, so it influences how they do it. We could go to the next one, please. So here are just some examples, again, from different countries. I just thought that, you know, I've been showing good examples from Australia. Here's a really bad example from Australia, where we have a tree that's actually growing into the road. And the only protection we've offered is a sign, and that's pretty bad management. On the other hand, in Asia and various other mountainous countries, we see just cliffside roads where no matter what speed you're going, if you go over that cliff, you're going to be going incredibly fast at the end. It's going to be a horrible crash. Here's a great example of a safe system road in New Zealand. And I thought a marvellously well-managed road in the Alps in Japan, where I was stunned by the level of control to ensure that road surface was in good quality order and safe and dry for people to drive on. And that's the level of variation we see in infrastructure. Next slide, please. But even bus stops vary so much from this good quality version in the United States to people milling around rural roads in Southeast Asia, or people actually using guardrail or F-barrier as a seat while they wait for the bus. It's so dangerous given that barrier's there because cars often leave the road there. Yet this is the kind of risky situation created with these different cultural norms and circumstances in which people conduct that behaviour. And next slide, please. Even stunningly, footpaths vary. In some cases, they're great and they're well regulated. In other cases, they don't exist. In other cases, they exist, but they've been completely taken over by shops. So people are still walking on the road. And the one at the top on the left, I think, is the most stunning of the photos I took on this in this regard. This is actually a rural highway in the southern Sahara, but it's become a shopping centre because people can gather there without paying to sell their wares anywhere else and try and sell to actually often high-speed traffic going past. Incredibly dangerous. And next slide, please. And last, post-crash care, of course, varies significantly, and we could go to the next slide. And these are just, as an example, these are just two photos of the backs of ambulances. This is the top one is an ambulance in a high-income country, looks fantastic. Good opportunity to really intervene and save seriously injured people. The bottom one, that's actually the back of an ambulance in a sub-Saharan African country, and all that's there is a little cot for someone to lie on. That's it. That's the only equipment in the ambulance. So again, the variation is huge. And next slide, please. So I promised 4 key messages. Cultural differences within countries really matter in road safety. And I think there is really a growing neglect of rural road safety. Yes, populations globally are urbanising, but the rural problem is still huge. Cultural differences should not be seen as restricted to on-road behaviours in road safety terms, but rather cultural differences, not just economies, deeply influence how we can and how we do manage road safety. And that creates the circumstance in which people behave. And thus, road safety management deeply influences on-road safety behaviour. And that's it from Kazu and I. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Job.
Thank you.
The next lecture is Mr. George Giannis, professor at the National Technical University of Athens. Professor Giannis, please start.
Good morning, everybody. I would like, first of all, to thank EATS for the invitation and congratulate the great EATS team for the excellent contribution to global road safety through the scientific journal and the different activities, including this highly interesting web conference. It is quite important to highlight that traffic culture is indeed the key concept in traffic safety, as the root cause encompassing all human factors related to road accidents. In fact, the human factors relate not only to road users' behavior, but also to the behavior of all road safety related authorities and stakeholders under the safe system approach. And safety culture to identify best practice and exploit it in the regions mostly needed. At the next slide, we can see that I'm going to present very briefly some statistics. First of all, to underline that the National Technical University Road Safety Observatory, where I'm coming from, is a center of research and innovation excellent in road safety with global recognition. We have a great team of 25 and more scientists working on safety since decades. We run an international reference website with state-of-the-art road safety data and knowledge, with which is visited very frequently, and an excellent research activity with diploma thesis, research projects, scientific publications, and a lot of committees at national, European, and global level. At the next slide, we might see that I'm going to present you, first of all, some statistics on road safety, then highlight the objective and source of today's presentation data, then proceed with the regional comparisons, and finally with the concluding remarks. So at the next slide, we highlight the key global statistics, where we can see at the graphs at the next slide that at the next slide of we can see that 1.35 million people are killed in road accidents, and road accidents constitute the 8th cause of death and first cause of death among people aged 5 to 29 years old globally. And if we start with some comparison between regions, we can see that Europe presents the lowest traffic fatality rate per population globally, and Africa has the worst road safety performance, up to 10 times more fatalities per population compared to the best performing European countries. So one can see that behind this performance lies differences in culture that we are going to watch more closely today. And of course, it is highlighted that the percentage of vulnerable road users, meaning pedestrians, pedal cyclists, and motorcyclists, are especially high, ranging up to 54% globally, needing a special focus. At the next slide, we can see that in Europe, almost 22,800 fatalities were recorded last year. A nice performance with 51 fatalities per million population, but still away from the real target, which is the zero vision, to have 0 fatalities one day on global roads. Of course, the target of having road accident fatalities between the decade 2010 and 2020 is unlikely to be achieved, but important steps have been achieved. And however, again, there are great discrepancies in road safety performance and great discrepancies in road safety culture among even the 27 European Union countries. And of course, more coordinated efforts are required at all levels in order to achieve the target set, including improving traffic safety culture. At the next slide, we can see, we can enter in our objectives of the study. In fact, at the next slides, we can see that the objective of the study is to capture the global diversity in traffic safety culture and behavior of road users, which defines the mobility patterns and consequently the respective road safety situation. To that end, data were derived from the second edition of the ESRA survey on road safety, indicating by road users' behaviors, attitudes, and beliefs to highlight comparison between regions. At the next slide, we can see that ESRA project is stands for Electronic Survey for Road Users' Attitude. It's a joint international initiative of research centers and road safety institutes across the world. And the project now it is in its second stage. The first stage was in 2016. Now with data from 2018-19, we analyze global road traffic culture. Project partners under the coordination of VIAS Institute in Belgium include several research institutes from Europe, including the National Technical University of Athens. And of course, there are 17 more supporting partners from the different countries in the world. ESRA2 survey covers 20 European, 2 North American, 5 African, and 5 Asian Oceanian countries, allowing for a first approach on comparing traffic culture globally. At the next slide, we can see we can start entering into and the next slide into the detail of our analysis, highlighting that measuring safety culture is not a straightforward issue. However, one main way of measuring traffic culture still identifying attitudes and stated behaviors. First of all, starting with this first slide concerning the perception of the relative importance of causes of road crashes, we see that most respondents from all regions believe that unsafe traffic behaviors are often a cause of a road crash involving a car. This is a common understanding. The risk perception of the unsafe behaviors as a frequent crash cause was the highest in Europe, from 74% for fatigue driving to 81% for drink driving. And the lowest rates were recorded in Asia-Oceania region, from 51 for driving after taking drugs and 57 for driving above the speed limit. So, and in North America, the rates range from 67 to 75 for driving after taking drugs or drink driving, and from 62 using handheld mobile phone to 69 drink and drive in Africa. One can already see the perception of unsafe behavior between the different regions, and how this perception varies between the regions, highlighting also a direct link of perception and final performance. The higher the perception, the better the road safety performance. At the next slide, we can see the acceptability of unsafe behavior in traffic. And the unsafe behavior, we mean mainly driving under the influence of alcohol or drugs, texting while driving, or fatigue driving. And there we see that acceptability of such unsafe behaviors was particularly low in Europe and North America, while the acceptability of these behaviors was significantly higher in Asia, Oceania, and Africa. And again, this highlights the higher the acceptability of unsafe behavior, the lowest the performance. Driving above the speed limits on motorways and freeways, which is the behavior with the highest rates of acceptability in all regions, was considered more acceptable in North America and Europe than in Africa and Asia, Oceania, highlighting there an issue which is, of course, counterintuitive, expecting that speeding would have been rated higher in best performing regions. But in fact, it is also an issue of quality of road infrastructure, meaning that Europeans and North Americans consider more easy to speed on better infrastructure of roads in these regions, and then present this higher acceptability rates of speeding. In all regions, however, driving above the speed limits in build-up areas was considered less acceptable than outside build-up areas. And of course, this highlights that people globally understand the role of speeding where vulnerable road users are around in inside build-up areas. Then at the next slide, we can see the self-declared behavior as a car driver. Driving under the influence of alcohol or drugs was the least frequently declared behavior in all regions, highlighting again that given that this is highly an offense, people tend not to necessarily fully say the truth. And while in Europe a higher percentage of car drivers declared drinking and driving, 13%, then driving after using drugs, and 5%. The opposite was observed in the other regions. So this is quite interesting to see that the behavior about driving under the influence. Speeding and mobile phone use while driving were the most frequent self-declared behaviors. And this is quite interesting to see that really people globally understand the unsafe behavior of speeding and mobile phone use. And self-declared speeding rates were higher in Europe and North America than in Asia, Oceania, and Africa, being in line with their perception of how important is speeding, as said at the previous slide. The highest ratio of mobile phone use while driving correspond to Africa, with 54% talking and 47% texting, percentages which are quite astonishing, taking into account the importance of these offenses. At the next slide, we can see the self-declared behavior as a pedestrian. And this is to highlight that when we're talking about traffic culture, we don't talk only about the drivers. Of course, they are the key people in safety and in traffic, but pedestrian behavior is still very important, especially in the cities. And of course, the most common pedestrian risky behavior was crossing the road outside the pedestrian crossing, with very high rates everywhere, followed by reading or text message on the phone or checking social media while walking on the street, with quite high, astonishingly high percentages, from 52 to 69%. Respondents listening to music through headphones was the least frequent reported behavior. And an interesting finding was that a respondent's region of residence had very little influence on the prevalence of risky behavior. So it is quite interesting to observe also this this finding. At the next slide, we can see the self-declared behavior of the other Vallum Road users group, the cyclists. And we see that cycling without using a helmet was the most frequently mentioned unsafe behavior. And this rate was significantly higher in Asia, Oceania, with 71%, and Europe, 69%, than in Africa, with 58%, and North America, 51%. A helmet is a tricky issue with low acceptability worldwide. However, we see that important differences between regions. In all regions, the least frequently mentioned unsafe behavior was cycling under the influence of alcohol, with very similar rates, 17 and 18%. Cycling while wearing headphones ranged from 29 to 53 in Europe and in Africa. And the corresponding lowest and highest percentages for the behavior, read a text message, email, or check social media, were again recorded in Europe and Africa. We might proceed to the next slide, where we can see at the next slide, we see the self-declared behavior as a power two-wheeler. The most frequent unsafe behaviors reported by power two-wheelers are riding faster than the speed limits outside built-up areas and riding without a helmet. And of course, we see quite a few differences in this specific group between Africa, riding without helmet, 49%, North America, 46%, and in Europe, 26%, lighting also the correspondence with performance of VRU fatalities. Perhaps we can proceed a little bit faster to the next slide, where we see the opinions on traffic rules and penalties. There we see that most of European, North American, and Asia-Oceania respondents agree that traffic rules concerning driving under the influence of alcohol should be stricter. And on the contrary, a minority agrees that penalties are too severe in Europe, 21%, North America, 18%, and Asia-Oceania, 34%. And figures on the use of mobile phone while driving are quite similar to the EU traffic rules. Perhaps at the next slide, the last one, we can see the support for policy measures. In all regions, the installation of alcohol interlock and were supported by more than 3/4 of the respondents. Zero tolerance for all drivers was higher in Asia-Oceania than in Europe and America. And measures for tackling speed, especially intelligent speed adaptation and dynamic warning signs, received more support in Asia-Oceania and Africa than in Europe and North America. So, at the next slides, we can proceed to the concluding remarks briefly. First of all, to highlight that despite the high percentage, the high perception of risk and low acceptability of unsafe behaviors, there is still a high percentage of car drivers who engage in such behaviors in all regions. We can see it at this next slide. Overall, the results of self-declared behavior and personal acceptability are consistent when compared by regions. However, there are some inconsistencies when comparing personal acceptability and self-declared behaviors. And of course, self-declared behavior reported by Valium road users should be taken into account seriously in order to identify the most frequent risky behaviors and the corresponding measures. At the next slide, we can see that Asian, Oceanian, and African road users have lower risk perception for certain unsafe behaviors as frequent crash cause compared to Europeans and North Americans, highlighting also their respective performance on safety. European car drivers who are admitted to driving under the influence of drugs at least once in the past 30 days were clearly fewer than in other regions. And among all road users, Asians, Oceanians are those who believe most that traffic rules related to mobile phone use, speeding, and alcohol should be stricter. And with my final slide and the final remark, we have to say that, of course, there are, the next slide, several differences in the attitudes and opinions of road users from different regions, which also highlight the respective variation in their road safety culture. And it is crucial to understand clearly the meaning of traffic safety culture and the importance of its development so that different countries can cooperate and learn from each other to reduce road crisis and related casualties. And the systematic implementation of integrated road safety policies highlighting the difference in cultures should be focused at all countries worldwide. Thank you very much. I hope I presented a global view of diversity of traffic safety culture and ready for further discussion later on. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Giannis. Thank you. The next lecture is Ms. Susanna Zamataro, Director General of the International Road Federation. Ms. Zamataro, would you please start your lecture?
Thank you very much. Arigato. Konbanwa. Watashi wa Susanna desu.
My name is Susanna. Nice to see you.
And hello to all the international speakers. I will start sharing my presentation. as well, but first of all, I'd like to, I hope you can see it well. I'd like to thank the International Association for Traffic Safety in Japan for this invitation. And we are very pleased as International Road Federation to support this conference on these very interesting and important topics that very often doesn't receive the attention that it deserves. Let me start by saying a few things about the International Road Federation so you can put into perspective as well what I will be saying further down in my presentation. We are an independent, not-for-profit organization which was established in 1948, right after the Second World War, for obvious reasons, and that was the need for reconstruction of the infrastructure. Our membership really spans from the public sector, so ministries at different federal level or down to the municipality level, and private sector, research institutions, NGOs, etc. So we've been active in this field, and with road safety being one of our key pillar of activities for the past 72 years. Many different types of activities we organized. We can really summarize them in three main strategic pillars: knowledge sharing, knowledge and expertise sharing and disseminations, the connections, the networking, really bringing people together via conferences, via our committees, and last but not least, advocacy activities that we perform both at the international level but often also at national level. We are also known for being the organization that produces the IRF World Road Statistics every year since 1964, so 57 years. We cover 208 countries, and the most important element to retain is that this data is collected from primary sources, so from the ministries, from the road authorities and national statistical offices. Our data collection spans, as you can see on the left-hand side, wider than just road accidents and safety, and it's used by, I would say, literally any stakeholder that works in the transport and the road sector. An innovation this year, we just launched an IRF Global Road Data Warehouse. We have now put on a digital platform all the data, and that will allow both us streamline our processes, because the collection process is now done rather than from an Excel file via an data input portal, but also allows the users to visualize and analyze data more thoroughly and faster in a much more effective way. And this work has been made possible thanks to the generous support of the Total Foundation. We also complemented this work with a series of dashboards to really facilitate the visualization, and the ones I'm showing here are just some examples specifically on road safety indicators, to really facilitate, make it easier for anyone to read and understand and compare data. Now, in this presentation, I've chosen, I know the previous speakers very well, and I have the pleasure to work with them very often. And I've decided to focus my presentation on a much more specific issue, and it's specifically relating to pedestrian. Let me close this one. The size of problem, the colleagues before me and the president mentioned it, this horrible figure, 1.3 million people dying on our roads, and out of that horrible figure, 4% are actually vulnerable road users, which means pedestrians, cyclists and motorcyclists. We see a wide variation in terms of locations from one country to the other when we look at pedestrian fatalities, with the typical trend being that high-income countries see pedestrians dying in urban areas, and low-income countries see greater number of fatalities in rural areas. But there's one common point in all this amongst all the countries is that most pedestrian collisions occur when pedestrians are actually trying to cross the road. Unfortunately, by the time I will finish this 20 minutes presentation, 20 or plus people will have died on urban traffic. So it gives us a sense of and scale of the problem. Let me see how to move this forward. Sorry. Sorry, I'm having an issue. There you go. When we zoom into pedestrian safety specifically in Japan, and we look at road fatalities by road user group, and these figures are referring to 2018, you see the pedestrians here represent 36%. So in 2018, 1,402 pedestrians were killed on Japanese road. And as I was mentioning before, about 70% of the pedestrian fatal accident in Japan occur while crossing the road. When we zoom further down into those data, we also see that, and we look at mortality rate by age group, we realize very quickly that roads are actually getting very risky for senior people. You see the figures of Japan on the left hand side, and it's unfortunately the only figure that keeps on growing since 2010. And on the right hand side, you see the impressive figures that we have. Sorry, for Korea, where the score and the rate of elder people being killed on roads, it's actually 4 times higher than the national average. And in the case of Japan, it's almost 3 times higher. So scoring around 9.4% when the national average is 3.5%. When you look at it again in this type of visualization as well, you see immediately where the problem lies. And by far in Japan, the elderly people are the group at highest risk in Japanese road traffic. Now, risk factors, I think some of the colleagues before were mentioning some of them, and we know them very well. Speed is definitely one of those. Distraction, as more and more of us are using these terrible machines, well, very useful, but also terrible when we are driving or walking. Distraction and the use of alcohol. The infographics that you see on this slide, they actually come from the WHO, and we know exactly the type of damage that can be done according to the type of speed. And so exactly for this reason and the type of figures that I was mentioning before, that pedestrian behavior has really become an important research area. As the size of human populations, especially living in big cities, as so-and-so was mentioning, is becoming bigger and bigger. But I want to agree with him as well that we should not be forgetting about rural roads. They do also remain a big problem as well. Sorry, I have a bit of a problem with my voice. Now, for sure, better road urban design is important for a decrease, but a better understanding of how human beings behave and the identification of those mechanisms underlying the behavioral differences between individuals of different gender, different age, and different culture provide and provide basis for prevention and education. So literally for us to be able to be more effective. Sorry. What's wrong? No, I want to talk about this very interesting study that I found. It's a joint study from French and Japanese researcher. They are assessing how pedestrians use social information to cross the road in cities in 2 different countries, in fact, with different social norms. And that's where it's really interesting to find out, between France and Japan. That showing social information and the probability of rule breaking are strongly correlated with culture and the country of pedestrian, with each country, of course, having its own principles and social norms. So culture influences the way we live and how we behave. So whilst there has been many studies actually that have tried to understand which factors influence the incidence of rule breaking at crossing, there's been very little focus on the decision-making processes of pedestrians. So how do they really perceive and interpret the information that they are receiving? So as I mentioned, this study, which actually the one I'm presenting is from 2017, but this group of researchers also produced further research in 2018 and 19. It looks at the role of social information in decision making. The observation of the road crossing behavior in presence of other individuals is in fact a very nice way and a means to study the influence of social information on decision making. And so the study investigated the influence of culture and social norms and social norm usage and scored a collective crossing of pedestrians at 4 locations: Nagoya in Japan and 2 locations in Strasbourg. The study attempts to identify, as I was saying, behind collective road crossing, the mechanism behind the collective road crossing behaviors, and investigates how this mechanism use social information and how they are affected by factors such as the number of pedestrians being present at the curb, their time of arrival at the crossing point, their gender, the age, and the culture. But let's start with the basics. When making a decision, actually, an individual has 3 main constraints. The first one is the time that he has available to make a decision. The second one is the information concerning each alternative, and that will actually determine the accuracy of the decision that he or she makes, and the risk, of course, involved in each of the alternatives. And the information an individual obtains from its environment can be, on one side, social. It means it can be produced even by a signal, or non-social. This is information that the person observes himself or herself. And so social information can indeed help to adapt quickly and quickly enough to the environment, but can also be so studies showing that social information such as age or more, the fact that we identify more performant individuals at the crossing and we decide to follow them can play tricks on us. In terms of social information use, this social information transmission
Ms. Zamataro, I'm sorry to interrupt you. We cannot hear your voice clearly, so would you please check your mic? Would you please check your mic? We cannot hear your voice clearly, so would you please check your microphone?
Yes, can you hear me better now?
Yeah, now it's okay.
Okay, thank you very much.
Go ahead, please. Thank you.
Thank you, sorry. And so I was saying the social information transmission can in fact lead to contagious and collective behaviors such as those that are observed when humans are crossing. And there are 2 different types of information or transmission of social information we need to look at. The information cascades, so a pedestrian observing action of others and decide to do the same, and the amplification. So in the case of information cascade, the person observes and decides to follow others, even if it's his own personal information, he's saying something else. In the case of the amplification processes, it's very similar, but with the difference that the probability to cross with the red light actually increases with the number of individual crossing. Why was France and Japan chosen for this study? Really because of this difference between Western cultures and Asian cultures. Western cultures are classified as being individualistic cultures. So they tend to, we observe there's a bigger tendency of taking risky behaviors, less tolerance for hierarchical relationship or following the rules, and there's more individualism compared to other cultures, in particular the Asian cultures. So individualistic cultures tend to make people more autonomous and taking more risk. The Asian cultures are more collectivist type of cultures. So societies seem to drive individuals to be more cautious, follow more the rules, and so take less risks. Now, the test and the study in a nutshell, as I mentioned, 4 different sites in Nagoya, Japan were observed, and 3 in Strasbourg in France. And here I'm oversimplifying because, of course, the study is much more complex, and I'm not giving you all the details, but they made sure that in the sample they were analyzing, they were exactly in the same type of situation with same traffic speed and number of pedestrians. And then they analyzed the rule breaking rate at time of crossing according to different variables. So according to the environment, the color, the lanes, the gender, the age, and the time of arrival at the curb, and of course the social variables. So the country, the number of pedestrians waiting at the same time, and whether the person was accompanied or not, and the behavior of the others. So here I have to speed up, I've heard the bell. First of all, they tried to look at the individual crossing at the red light, because they wanted to get a sense before they would measure the collective crossing. And among the 5,445 road crossing analyzed, 30% of those crossing were illegal, meaning pedestrians were crossing with a red light. However, when they were digging into the data, they saw that this rate of rule breaking was a lot higher in France than it was in Japan. But when they combined Japanese and French data, then the rate of rule breaking, one of the key factors that influencing was the gender. And this confirms what the studies tell us, that women tend to take less risks, and men also tend to decide a lot faster than women do. Women tend to follow more others. When they look at they analyze the collective crossing at red lights, it's clear that French and Japanese pedestrians have different behaviors when following other pedestrians who are actually crossing against the red light. The Japanese tend to follow faster. But what was clear, fundamental from the study, and important here for the discussion we're having today, it's the social influence in Japan was found to be extremely strong. They felt the group pressure. So what was observed was that when yes, maybe I can summarize it quickly. So here, first of all, the great impact of the country of residence, and determined, in fact, as well by the culture. Japanese people tend to use more social information than the French people rely more on their own personal information. And the number of waiting pedestrians and gender are also very important. It was observed in the case of the Japanese people, the more people were standing at the zebra and waiting, the more this functioned as some sort of deterrent for people to break rules, because they were more conscious of social norms. The conclusion here, indeed, many of us are focusing on the 3 famous E: engineering, education, and enforcement. But for us to be really effective, especially in countries like Japan, tailoring the right strategies to reduce pedestrians' fatalities requires really a solid understanding of decision-making processes. So how people and the road user really perceive and interpret the information they receive. Arigato. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Zamataro. Thank you. The next lecture is Mr. Nicholas Wall, Director of the Center for Health and Safety Culture and Professor at Montana State University. Professor Wall, would you please start? Professor Wald, would you please start your lecture? Please switch. Would you please start your presentation?
Yes, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone, depending on where you're joining us around the world today. Today I'll be talking about traffic safety culture and its relationship to the safe system approach and the goal of reaching Vision Zero. I'll be shifting a bit of my conversation from talking about culture with a capital C in terms of shifting from national culture to culture that can exist in any social group, workplace, school, family, neighborhood, region, and looking at how us as social beings are influenced by our social environment and how the culture of any group can influence the behaviors of people who identify with that particular group. We're talking today about the traffic safety system. The traffic safety system, as Soames mentioned, includes roads, vehicles, and the people who occupy them. And whether or not we are an academic trying to understand the causes of traffic safety, or whether we're practitioners trying to institute strategies to improve traffic safety, I think we have one common goal when we focus on traffic safety, and that is trying to change behavior of our road users. I think that's fundamental for all our efforts, is to understand the role of the road user and how their behaviors relate to traffic safety performance. And we know from several studies, when we're looking at the different factors that are involved in traffic safety, whether it's the driver, the vehicle, or the environment, that most often it's some action by the driver or some inaction by the driver that is the primary critical reason for a crash. So if we're trying to make a significant improvements in traffic safety, we need to address the role of the driver, because they are quite often the critical factor in the causation of a fatal crash. So to focus on behavior and change behavior, we also need to go a bit deeper and understand, why do behaviors take place? What are the influences on behavior? Without understanding the influences, we can't have a chance to change the behavior. And looking at psychology of behavior, we can look at very different sources as to why behaviors take place. The biology, we have biological impulses to engage in certain behaviors. We eat when we're hungry, for example. Some of our behaviors are also influenced by our psychology, our personality, our education, our experiences through life. We also, as Soames mentioned, a lot of our behaviors are influenced by our physical environment. We react to the affordances in our physical environment. But as the example of the pedestrian crossing that Susanna just mentioned, human beings are also very strongly influenced by their social environment. And the whole focus of traffic safety culture as a way of addressing our traffic safety goals is to look at the role of the social environment in influencing our decisions to be safe or to be dangerous. So when we look at traffic safety culture's approach to traffic safety, we're trying to change behavior of road users, but also the behavior and actions taken by traffic safety stakeholders. And our focus on changing behavior is understanding the role of culture within the groups of people whose behavior we're trying to change. So we're very much focused on the meaning and the role of culture in changing behavior. And culture is a very important construct, a very important part of being a human being. Most human beings are intrinsically social beings. We need to have a sense of belonging to groups. And that sense of belonging is such a primary motivating factor that we try and do things that lead to group acceptance, and we try avoiding behaviors that lead to group rejection. Culture is very important because it's also part of how we identify ourselves. The way we identify ourselves is often related to the groups we identify with. So when we define ourselves and think about ourselves, it's often in terms of what groups we belong to. It becomes an important part of our social identity to belong to specific groups. It's how we define ourselves and how we feel confident interacting in our world by identifying with specific groups. And historically, evolutionary, belonging to groups and identifying with groups was key to survival. It was only possible by belonging and identifying with groups that we could cooperate together to survive the hazards of our environment. And still true today, many of the needs of coping with the world involve cooperation, and that involves some sense of shared culture and belonging to a group. By having a shared culture, we have the same goals, the same beliefs, and so forth, so that we can cooperate more effectively together. So let's talk a bit about what we mean by culture, and then we can talk about its role in traffic safety. If you look at cultural studies and research in sociology over the many years that culture has been a concept, it's been spoken of in terms of beliefs, the shared beliefs that a group has, the shared way of thinking within a group. It's also been talked about the shared way that people in a group behave, their common behaviors. It's also been spoken about in terms of what that group produces, the art, the stories, the music, the policies, the laws. So you've had several different ways of talking about culture, beliefs, behaviors, and artifacts. And with that very broad, very inclusive definition, the issue is, well, what's left to explain or predict in the world? What's left? How can you use culture? What can you use culture for to explain or predict? There's nothing really left to predict other than beliefs, behaviors, and artifacts. So defined in this way, it's too inclusive, and it means almost everything and therefore nothing. So the point is being made as to why are we using culture? And this point, going back to my earlier slide, we're using culture to change behavior. So behaviors are the target of change. So behavior needs to be something separate from, but related to culture. So instead, we define culture as shared beliefs. A shared way of thinking in a group is what we mean by culture, because then we can explain and predict behaviors and artifacts that a group may institute. So if we want to change behaviors, if we want to change behaviors of road users, for example, reduce speeding or reduce drunk driving, we need to understand the shared beliefs amongst people who engage in that behavior. What are the beliefs that they share that influences their willingness and intention to engage those behaviors? If we want to have traffic safety stakeholders change their laws or policy around a certain behavior, for example, in the US, there are still some states like Montana which does not have a primary seatbelt law. How do we change policymakers' decisions to create those new laws so it is a primary? We need to change their shared beliefs so that they do decide to change those particular laws. So for us, culture is defined as the shared beliefs, and we use those to explain and predict behaviors and artifacts. And then the goal becomes, how do you create strategies that changes the beliefs within a group so that their behaviors and the actions they take in terms of artifacts, how those change. So let's keep talking a bit more about common language. If we're interested in working together and collaborating together in understanding traffic safety culture better and how traffic safety culture can help us to get to Vision Zero, which is a common American term for zero traffic fatalities and zero serious injuries. What do we mean exactly by traffic safety culture, and what do we mean by Vision Zero? And in between these two, we have the idea of the safe system approach, which was mentioned by George earlier. What do we mean by these concepts? Can we agree on these concepts so that we have a common language and a common vocabulary so that we're able to work together more effectively? So traffic safety culture, the formal definition that we use is traffic safety culture encompasses the shared values, assumptions, and beliefs that influence road user behaviors and stakeholder actions. So again, shared way of thinking within a group, but that group is not just road users, it's also the stakeholders responsible for traffic safety and the actions they may take. Safety or safe system approach is another key concept. The safe system approach, which our friends in Australia are been using for a while, but is becoming a newer concept in the US, is basically a philosophical framework for how traffic safety is approached. And one of the key and new premises of the safe system approach is that everyone that uses the road or has responsibility for the road has a responsibility to work together to achieve the goals of traffic safety. It's not just the responsibility of the Department of Transportation, it's the responsibility of everyone who's a stakeholder in traffic safety, which includes medical fields, which includes driver education programs. It's everyone who has a stake in traffic safety has some responsibility to work together to ensure that we have a safe system for traffic safety. And Vision Zero is simply the goal of reaching zero traffic fatalities and serious injuries, but it's more than a goal, it's also a moral statement that zero is the only acceptable number of traffic fatalities and serious injuries in our society. So it's a cultural statement, it's a moral statement that zero is the only acceptable goal. It's not okay to have even a few fatalities on your road, because those are real people with real families and real lives. And when we have the understanding of those three concepts, Vision Zero, the safe system approach, and traffic safety culture, it's helpful to understand how these concepts relate to each other and support each other. So on the right, we have the US notion of Vision Zero of getting to zero traffic fatalities and serious injuries by 2050, which is going to require a pretty steep change going from 37,000 deaths a year right now to zero by 2050. And the Road to Zero Coalition, which is a national coalition, has identified three key strategies to get to that vision of zero. The first is to double down on what works. So investing more money in strategies that data and evaluations has shown to be effective. Invest more in what we know works. The second pillar is to accelerate advanced technology. So that's using advanced technology, intelligent technology for road infrastructure and automated vehicles. The third is to increase the safety culture. And part of that, increasing the safety culture, is to grow a safe system approach to managing traffic safety in the US. And to get that safe system approach started and sustainable, we need to change fundamentally the national traffic safety culture, as well as the traffic safety culture amongst the key players who are the stakeholders in achieving the safe system. So the safe system approach is one of the key pillars for the North American vision to get to zero fatalities and serious injuries. And as we've heard before from the previous speakers, the safe system approach is essentially trying to make safer vehicles, safer roads, and safer people, bringing a systems thinking approach to traffic safety and getting all the traffic safety stakeholders working together for the common goal of Vision Zero, which basically means we sort of shift where we're looking to find solutions to get to our Vision Zero target. So instead of sort of relying on national governments or state governments to take action to get to Vision Zero, we need to see how we can identify, measure, and change the traffic safety culture of communities, of schools, of workplaces, of friend groups, of family groups, trying to change culture across the social environment so all important social groups have a stronger traffic safety culture and are all creating shared beliefs and values and assumptions and attitudes that make their group members behave more safely. And then the safe system approach is our key strategy, one of the pillar strategies to get to Vision Zero. But the foundation for the safe system approach is creating a strong traffic safety culture. One of our main national traffic associations makes the point that creating a positive traffic safety culture is fundamental to moving our nation toward our goal of Vision Zero. Here is a particular model that we use to operationalize traffic safety culture. It identifies the specific kinds of beliefs that we believe are important in defining traffic safety culture, and we use this model to not only measure traffic safety culture, but also analyze data to identify which particular types of beliefs within a culture are the important predictors of safe or unsafe behavior. And traffic safety culture is the key foundation for several reasons. First of all, if we don't have a strong safety culture, we're not going to have be brave enough or motivated enough to get to Vision Zero. If we don't have a strong safety culture, we're not going to work together as stakeholders from different disciplines and backgrounds to work together. We need to create a traffic safety culture that not only prioritizes traffic safety, but also recognizes the importance and necessity of working together as multiple traffic safety stakeholders, not working alone. And finally, we also need to recognize that one traffic safety strategy is to change the traffic safety culture of road users so that not speeding becomes the norm. Not drinking and driving is the norm. Wearing your seatbelt is the norm and expected behavior. We become safe because it's who we are. It's how we define ourselves in our group, so that safety becomes the primary value of the decisions we make when we choose to operate on the roadways. Now, I'm going to be a bit brave here and show a couple of videos, and I'll play one first to make sure it's working properly before I carry on. But when we're trying to change traffic safety culture among stakeholders or among social groups like workplaces or families or in schools, social media and other forms of communication are one way of trying to change beliefs, to create beliefs which are more supportive of safe behavior. And here I have two examples of videos that try and communicate in a way that are trying to change beliefs to encourage seatbelt use. And in a sense, there's a culture of culture. There's a beliefs about how you change beliefs. One approach is to show fearful messages which scare people into being safe. The other philosophical approach is showing concern but hope that change is possible. And we're a big advocate for the hope perspective. And I'll talk about why in a minute. So let me first try and show this video, and then I'll ask for confirmation that it worked before I do any more.
Like most victims, Julie knew her killer. It was her son. He wasn't wearing his seatbelt. After crushing her to death, he sat back down. Think, always wear a seatbelt.
So before I show the next one, can someone from GIFs confirm that that played acceptably?
Yes.
Thank you. Now let's contrast that with this commercial, again about seatbelts, but I want you to sort of look at the content and feel the tone of this commercial. So as you see, two very different approaches of communication strategies, in this case, commercials, trying to change beliefs, trying to change traffic safety culture. And we believe that the best approach for getting people to change their beliefs and make positive change in their behavior is through the hopeful approach to messaging. And the reason is that you have concern, you identify that seatbelt use is important, but you show the behavior you want. You show people the path forward. You show them through the family's actions what you want them to do. You want them to wear your seatbelt. And because of the positive value around family and protecting family, you're aligning with people's culture around the importance of family. So you're giving them the will and the motivation to move forward in this path to wear their seatbelts. Contrast that with the previous example. You've gone far past concern to fear, and some fearful messages are so fearful, people will ignore them because they're uncomfortable to watch or they think they're impossible. And you don't show the behavior you want in this particular commercial. There is no path. You're not showing them what you want them to do. And because of the negative emotions associated with this, it's very difficult for people to engage and want to improve the situation, so you don't have the same level of will and motivation to move forward. So we're a big advocate for changing traffic safety culture through positive messages, hopeful messages that use the strengths within a culture, in this case, the values that most people share within their groups for family and protecting family. I will stop there. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor Ward. Thank you for waiting. We are restarting the forum. We will now start a panel discussion. First, let me introduce today's panelist, Dr. Soren Job, Head of the Global Road Safety Facility and Global Lead Road Safety with the World Bank. Professor George Giannis, Professor at the National Technical University of Athens. Ms. Susanna Zamataro, Director General of the International Road Federation. And Professor Nicholas Ward, Director of the Center for Health and Safety Culture and Professor at Montana State University. They gave lectures earlier. The moderator is Dr. Yuto Kitamura, Chairman of IATS International Forum Committee. If you have any questions, you can post them from the Q&A icon at the bottom of the screen. Please make sure to indicate to whom your question is directed. Please note that we may not be able to respond to all questions. Dr. Kitamura, please start.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much, all the speakers, for the wonderful and inspiring, thought-provoking presentations. And the presentation started with Dr. Job, really focused on the issue of road safety management, how that has been culturally affected, and then how the cultural differences are very important to consider. Then Professor Giannis sketched out how the situations around the world have been in terms of the global road safety conditions. And then it was quite interesting how the lower risk perceptions and many other issues are raised in his presentations. And then lastly, presented integrated road safety policy, the importance of that. Then Ms. Zamataro pointed out quite interesting, shared a quite interesting example of the comparison between Japan and France, and how the social norms and social conformism have been influencing to the pedestrian behaviors. and then how those pedestrians and then so people who are on the street getting the social informations, and then they apply on their behavior. And then last but not the least, the Professor Ward really clarified what the culture actually means. And then we really have to make a clear distinguishment between the beliefs and then also the behavior and the artifacts. And then he had really showed quite important elements of and the relationship amongst the foundations, strategy, and target. And then last video was quite interesting, and then we really received a message from the Professor Ward. So now I would like to open the floor for the discussion amongst the panelists. And then we have already received the questions specifically addressed to the two presenters. There is a question to Dr. Job about the interaction between culture and economy, and then also the willingness to pay and the impact of the enforcement. So I would appreciate if Dr. Job could respond to that. And then second, there is a question to Professor Giannis on the data about the fatalities. So I would like to invite later the Professor Giannis to respond to that specific question addressed to you. Then there were no specific questions to last two panelists. Probably there was not enough time for the viewers to write up. So I like to also, sorry, there's another question to the Professor Giannis about the speed limits and the overspeeding. Okay, and then there was not specific questions to Mr. Mataro and Professor Ward. So let me take my privilege to ask one question to both of you, because both of you really highlighted the importance of understanding the cultural context, and then what the beliefs or values, how the beliefs or even values or rationale impact on the road behaviors. And then there was a quite interesting case about the comparison between Japan and France. However, I have a question, whether it's always correct for the people to wait, like Japanese pedestrians often do. I used to live in Paris, and I was waiting for I was standing because the pedestrian light was red, but there was no car, and people looked at me, and then they thought I'm stupid, because that happens in Japan. So how you can make a judgment, rational judgment, I mean, that also depends on the cultural context. For instance, the last two videos showed by Professor Ward, in some country, it may be more impactful to raise the fairness among the road users. So in order to give a more stronger message, you may not agree, but there may be that possibility that in some country you may like to persuade your message in a different manner, which may be more effective. So this cultural aspect is very relative, and then depending on the context of the society. So how you would respond to my question? I mean, I have a question, whether there is always the certain ways to persuade the message to influence to the beliefs of the road users in order to take proper actions. So I hope my questions to Mr. Mataro and Professor Ward is clear enough. I mean, it may not be really a question, but my comments or, to my response to the presentations by two of you. Okay, so now I'd like to invite the panelists to respond to the questions. So first, I'd like to give the floor to the Dr. Job for your response, please, Dr. Job.
Thank you, Professor. So they were two really great questions, and actually one of them on enforcement, I think really connects closely to another one I was asked about. How do we change culture to improve road safety? So first to the issue of culture and economy. So certainly the economy is one of the drivers of the extent to which we manage road safety. But I think it's very important not to retreat to a fundamental perception that it's the main driver or the only driver, and therefore low-income countries don't have any chance of managing road safety. Because as I showed on that dot point graph, there are low-income countries doing very well in road safety, as well as low-income countries doing extremely badly in road safety. And so I think certainly the economy does drive the quality of the vehicles, the quality of the infrastructure to an extent, but partly it's about where you choose to spend your money. And so that also, because it's a circumstance in which people behave, influences greatly how people behave. And I think partly because, as Nicholas pointed out, it changes beliefs. If governments aren't seen to be serious about road safety, then that changes cultural beliefs about who should take it seriously. But I think it's very important to appreciate there is also a causal connection in the other direction. If we have bad culture, if we have bad road safety, that will actually retard economic growth. And the World Bank's done a very nice study of 5 countries which showed that if they managed to just meet the UN target by halving deaths and serious injuries, then their economies, their long-term economic growth would be substantially increased. So it isn't just that economy affects culture, it's also that the culture and the quality of road safety directly affects the economy of low and middle income countries. On enforcement, I also think that Nicholas's point about with those last 2 examples, that people don't listen to really severe fear outcomes is critical to why enforcement is necessary. And in a way, it's a very weird psychological effect that if you threaten someone with a crash and horrible injuries and death, you basically won't change their behaviour. But if you can effectively threaten them with a serious fine or losing their licence, they will change their behaviour. And to most people, that sounds crazy. You threaten me with death, I do nothing. You threaten me with a fine, I'll change. Why? And I think the fundamental answer is another deep cultural belief in pretty much every country it's ever been assessed in, and that is optimism bias, or in this particular case, driver overconfidence. We've done this study in Australia, and this is what we find. If you ask drivers, are you a much better driver than average, a better driver than average, an average driver, worse, etc., what you find is the large majority believe they're a better driver than average. Only 2.1% of the Australian population believe they're a worse driver than average. Now, that's got to be a bias. We can't all be better than everyone else. There's got to be about as many people worse than average as better than average. That's normally the way a normal graphic bell curve works. But we don't believe that. And this is key to why enforcement is critical. If you say to people, if you speed, you'll crash and die, they say, this is what a person thinks. Well, I've been speeding for years. I haven't crashed or died yet. I must be really good at it. I'm a very good driver. I don't have to worry about that risk. If you can convince them that with new speed cameras or new enforcement or whatever, we will fine you, that circumvents their optimism, because it says, we don't care how good you are. We're still going to fine you simply because you're speeding. And so that's why enforcement can change behaviour very effectively using kind of a low-level fear rather than that extremely high-level fear that Nicholas was pointing out is very ineffective as a behaviour change mechanism. The other thing to highlight about enforcement, and this is really coming to part of an answer about how we change cultures, is that we should not think the way most of us do commonly, that I've got to change attitudes and then I can change behaviours. That's actually not true. That will work, but it's not the only way to do it. If we also can do it the other way around, if you can force people to change their behaviour, they will change their attitude to match their behaviour. And that's a very well-established effect in the laboratory. It's called cognitive dissonance in psychology. But let me give you an example in road safety. when we introduced random breath testing and put a huge enforcement pressure on drink driving in Australia, we didn't say anything about how bad it was, how evil it was. We simply said, we will catch you. And our rate of drink driving deaths actually more than halved the instant, or actually for the few weeks of advertising before it came in, but it halved from year to year. But the other extraordinary thing that happened was people changed their attitude to drink driving without any more information. So what happened was we forced them, a great many of them, to stop drink driving. So what they were then in this odd position of, I'm not going to drink drive because I'll get caught, but I think it's okay. And that's a very uncomfortable psychological position. So the way people change is they change their attitude to match their behaviour, so it's psychologically comfortable. So when they stop drink driving, they then start to decide that drink driving is a very bad thing to do anyway. So, and that will start to change culture. So I think we shouldn't retreat from enforcement as one of the ways we can change culture. And the last point I would make is we need to think carefully about how we talk about enforcement because of norms. So typically when police talk about enforcement, if you say, why are you doing speed enforcement on this road? They'll pick the most extreme example of behaviour. Oh, we caught this person doing 150 kilometres an hour in a 50 zone. Now, that's a really bad message because first it says, oh, you can do 150 there and not kill yourself. That's very odd. That's a bad message. It sets a norm that very high speeds are survivable. If police answer by saying, first point I want to make is 99% of the drivers going past don't get caught. The norm is most people are not speeding, but we will stop that 1% who are causing the harm. That's a better way to discuss enforcement in order to create and encourage good cultural norms. Thanks.
Thank you very much. That's quite interesting. Yes, I agree. Okay, so now I'd like to invite Professor Janice to respond to the questions.
Yes, there were a couple of very interesting questions, and I thank you very much with very appropriate remarks. I provided some first insight by text. I would like to say, first of all, that measuring both safety performance and safety culture are very tricky issues, especially concerning performance that was raised. Of course, there are several countries in the world that they face important data underreporting or misclassification problems. In fact, we don't really know the real size of the problem, both in terms of number of accidents and in number of injuries and fatalities. That's the reason in few countries, the World Health Organization has chosen to use a methodology to estimate fatalities rather than relying on underreported police reports. Both ways are not close to reality. Sometimes yes, sometimes not, but certainly we don't know the reality. And this is a fundamental issue about a number of crashes and road safety performance. However, what is even more striking is the fact that only crashes is not enough to see the real problems. Crash data are meaningful only if they are combined with exposure data, meaning crashes per kilometers driven, crashes per traffic characteristics, per time, etc., or even person kilometers driven. And in addition, when we have crash and exposure, we know the size of the problem. The causes of the problem, the crash causalities, are revealed only when crashes are correlated with safety performance indicators, meaning behavior, infrastructure, traffic, that is the percentage of drivers speeding, the percentage of drivers under the influence of alcohol, the compliance in seatbelt and helmet wearing, etc. So we lack data. And as said, as written in my reply, very often in safety analysis, we go in blind. That is something that Dr. Jobs said very well on a couple of other occasions. Everybody underestimates the role of speeding. Road users, pedestrians, but also the authorities and the stakeholders. Why? Because we don't have data about speeding. Everybody thinks that the speeding is not as present as we think. But whenever in few countries we have speeding measurements, we see that it is an astonishingly high percentage of driving above speed limits, and quite a few of them well above the speed limits. So we need good crash data to be combined with exposure data and KPIs. So it is urgent to work on this at a global level. Otherwise, I repeat, we are going in blind in our analysis. And then, of course, there are some initiatives globally, especially with a new decade for action on road safety. The IRF statistics are an extremely useful source of data, because they have following and road traffic for more than 50 years. And we have all the time series which reveal the real size of the problem. However, we need to analyze, and we have to complement all this data with KPIs. KPIs across to demonstrate that only good data will allow for real to identify the real size of the causes of accidents on the road. Then there was another mention about speed limits. And of course, I would like to say there that the more we dig into the data, the more we find new problems and the real problems. If we are at a very high level, of course, we have a global picture, but only when we see what are the underlying situations in terms of infrastructure, traffic, behavior, only we get the real picture. Professor Lipovac from Serbia said that perhaps the different perception about speeding in Africa relates to lower speed limits in the related roads in Africa, and this is very correct. So we have to always to go for higher resolution data to see the real size of the problem. And of course, then now we face a great challenge with the new technology, especially smartphones, cameras on the roads, a lot of new technologies which allow us to have very good data in terms at least of exposure and of KPIs, key performance indicators. And there I would like to stress the importance of behavior change during the COVID crisis. We have seen that now we follow data day by day, and much more decisions are based on data than before. And this is a change in culture that we can copy also for road safety. If we start measuring safety, as I said, we have so many fatalities per minute, per hour, per day in every country globally, then perception changes. And not only the perceptions of users, but also the perception of stakeholders and authorities and decision makers. And then we have a real change. So data is the driver for traffic safety culture change. And only by demonstrating that we have a serious effort and good data, we demonstrate also the importance of the problem. Whenever we say that we don't have the data, this really passes a message to the road user at the end of the day that we don't have the data because it's not a big problem. So it is even an issue of campaigning for safety culture, for better safety culture, disposing better data. So I answered the two questions. I think that there is one more question.
Yes, that will be for the second round. I mean, there are more questions coming up. So thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. It was very clear. Thank you. So now I'd like to ask Mr. Mataro for your response.
Arigato, thank you, Professor Kitamura. I can reassure you, I do have exactly the same feeling that you have experienced in Paris. I come from the very south of Italy, Sicily. And although that is European Union, in my region, the rule is to have no rules. First of all, in most of the times, unfortunately, the infrastructure is not there to protect road users, so not sufficient zebra crossings, no traffic lights for pedestrians, and so that further cultivates a culture of far west, literally. It's very rare, unfortunately, still in my region, which is part of the European Union, to see drivers stopping at zebra crossing. I've been living now in Switzerland for the past 18 years. And yes, I can relate to your feeling. First of all, a couple of elements that allows us to bring forward this issue of the culture. The road safety, the value of road safety and the respect for the rules is really embedded in the Swiss culture. They're very well known for being people who have clear rules and do respect them. So like in Japan, I have to say, you feel that social pressure that even if my judgment is saying, look, it's red, but there's nobody coming, I should go, I could go. You feel that pressure, even when you are alone actually standing there. Yes, you might feel as I felt. For me, it's different because I work on road safety. So I've not been brought here. I've not been to school here. That value comes because of my engagement with road safety. And because after 18 years, I also learned to respect the rules here. So I agree with you. It's not an easy one, but again, my answer is you can avoid that when those values actually are embedded in the culture. How do you get there? Education and the community. We have, I think it was just Professor Ward who was touching upon the importance of community, but we have seen in many different programs in remote areas, in India, in villages in Africa, the importance of the community and that influence. The other one is enforcement, and I cannot agree more with Stones and on the idea I put forward about enforcement and as a way to change culture. And again, I can give you a very personal example. Again, Sicily, summer, many of us use the motorcycle, mopeds, whatever you want to call it, the Vespa, and because it's summer and we are all going to the beach, in the past, nobody was wearing a helmet even when the law was there, because we like to have our hair in the wind, or we were wet because we were just coming out of the beach. The moment the government decided to enforce, it was fixed. I swear to you, it was fixed in 2 days. They chose 2 key locations in the city that they were the main access to the beach areas, and everybody, literally everybody got caught. At that time, there were no iPhones to be used so that we could not alert each other. It was everybody got a massive fine. And with that, it was sorted out. And strangely enough, that was so strong and so shocking for the type of culture we are used to, that even when the enforcement didn't continue further down, everybody, start using the helmet. But that type of success, at some point, if enforcement and resources are not invested in enforcement, tends to be lost. In fact, last time I was in Sicily, I was shocked to see that again, because now there's economic crisis, there's not much money to be put in enforcement, nobody's wearing helmets anymore, and even seatbelt, exactly the same story. I agree with Soms about how it's extremely important how you discuss enforcement as well. Again, the stupid example of the helmet, there was no discussion. They just said, this is the law, you have to respect it, full stop. And it was fixed. Another point, and maybe I'll stop here because I saw questions coming in. A colleague of us wrote to both Professor Yanis and Dr. Jones, Emma McLennan. She's the director of an NGO called EAST, and she's from Cyprus. And I think there's somebody who was asking also a question about Cyprus. Another thing that is really, it would be interesting to study a little bit more. She noticed that there are a lot of Swedish or Northern European tourists coming down to Cyprus. Now, these countries perform extremely well in terms of road safety, and all these people respect the rules when they are in their own countries. As soon as they get to Cyprus, she was flagging out to us that, they just become somebody else. So what triggers that type of reaction, in fact? And I'll stop here, and we'll be happy to take afterwards a question on Cyprus, in fact, and a couple of others. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for sharing such interesting stories. And then, it was very clear. And then definitely we will be having the second round for the questions and answers. So now I'd like to ask Professor Ward to respond.
Sure. I'll just touch on a few things that came up, going back to what Susanna and Soames was saying about the role of enforcement, and in particular, how you communicate about enforcement. Another perspective on that is how you communicate about the laws being enforced. Communicating that it's a law, that's it, is different from saying that 80% of our community supports this law. So showing that the law, in fact, represents a norm gives more weight to those particular laws when they're enforced. You yourself made the interesting point about, Kitamura-san, you were talking about whether a particular cultural strategy will work in every culture or whether it's specific to a culture. And I think that's a critical aspect of understanding traffic safety culture as a paradigm for changing culture. There's not one size fits all. Applying traffic safety culture has to be specific to the culture you're looking at. A speed bump will work in Montana as well as it works in France, as well as it works in Australia. But a culture-based strategy that focuses on beliefs and values has to be specific to that culture that you're talking about. And even more specific, a culture-based strategy in Australia won't work for perhaps all Australians. You may need to focus on young male teens, or you may need to focus on a particular demographic group who drinks heavily. You need to be very aware of the group whose behavior you're trying to change, and take the extra effort of understanding what those beliefs are. There's been lots of examples where well-intended traffic safety professionals said, we need to fix their problem, we think their culture is, so we will engage in this particular strategy, and they're misperceiving what the actual culture is. We did a study here in the US with an enforcement agency who wasn't investing lots of resources in seatbelt enforcement. And they believed that the residents of their community didn't want to have the seatbelt law enforced. They were misperceiving what the residents' culture was. When we actually surveyed the culture of the residents, they supported the seatbelt law very much, and they wanted it enforced. So the enforcement agency were making decisions based on a misperception of what the city's culture was. Unless we understand what the true culture is, we cannot design relevant and effective strategies that are going to be acceptable to those cultures. So we very much need to make it, whatever we decide to do, needs to be based on actually understanding the true culture of the group we're focusing on. And the last thing I'll talk about is May de Glassa in the chat box asked a question about what can countries and cities do to change traffic safety culture when they have limited resources. Susanna just touched on this again. It's about community. It's traffic safety culture is something every group can do. It's not just the federal Department of Transportation or the police department. It's things you can do as a family. It's things you can do as a neighborhood. It's things you can do as a school. So wherever there's a group that has a culture, do something to start a conversation about what is the effect on traffic safety in our group? What should we be doing? What should we be believing? Do we really have traffic safety as our priority, or are we just pretending we do? You know, we often talk in the work that we do that having conversations as a family, what are we going to do to take care of each other as a family? And an important theme to conversations around traffic safety culture is not what am I going to do to make me safer, it's what can I do to make you safer. Shifting the conversation from I need to be safer, what do I need to be safer, to what can we do to make each other safer? Because in a group, you want to protect not only the culture of the group, but also the health and safety of the group. So it's how can you work together to make each other safety? How can you watch out for each other? You know, teaching children in school to ask their parents to put their seatbelt on. To teach kids in school to say, I don't want to go fast in a car. So there's things we can do in small groups, not just relying on the government to do it for us. It's about helping each other, caring for each other, protecting our groups, protecting each other's health and safety.
Thank you.
I'll pause there.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you. That's very convincing. So now we would like to move on to the second round for the questions raised in the Q&A boxes. And then thank you very much for, echoing and synthesizing the comments made by other panelists. So, you are naturally already having discussions, not only responding to the questions, but also, having discussions amongst yourselves. So I truly appreciate that. So now, can we go the same order? So could I invite Dr. Job first to respond to the questions addressed in the box? May I invite you?
Thank you very much. Certainly. So I thought one of the things we're touching on quite a bit in the box is enforcement and education and awareness raising, etc. And so I thought I'd talk a little bit about this. One of the questions which was very directly on this was which is more effective, enforcement or awareness raising? Are there any studies of this? And there are some very good experiences which tell us a lot about this. So let me give you an example. Usually when people resort to enforcement, because of the politics of that not being such a wonderful thing to do often, or seen as not such a wonderful thing, people don't do it until they've tried education and awareness raising. And certainly in many countries I've worked in, that's been the case. So, but let me give you one where we've got really good data. In Australia, in the state of New South Wales, because we did it separately by each state, that's our biggest population state. We did bombardment advertising to try and convince people to wear a seatbelt. And that included a lot of awareness raising about the risk, about how they work, about what happens if you don't wear a seatbelt, etc. And with that, we pushed seatbelt wearing rate from about 20% to closer to 25%. We then said, okay, that's not enough. 75% more of people are still not wearing a seatbelt. We will introduce a penalty. We will create enforcement. We advertised that. It went to over 95% overnight. So to me, that's a powerful story. A lot of education, 25%. One lot of enforcement, 95%. To me, that tells it. And we see that repeatedly with drink driving and with various other behaviours, that education will get you some level of improvement, but enforcement will get you a lot more. And I think one of the reasons that's true is that these road safety problem behaviours are not lack of knowledge. When we should think about what these fix, education fixes a lack of knowledge. The problem is not a lack of knowledge. The problem is a lack of motivation. And the failures of people's behaviour on the road are usually motivational problems. They're not skill problems and they're not knowledge problems. People don't speed because they don't know what a seatbelt sign means, what a speed sign means. It's not a knowledge problem. They speed because they want to. It's a motivation problem. And we should really think about how do we change that motivation. And by the way, to one of the points made earlier, we often do misunderstand that motivation by not understanding our target audience, which I think Nicholas was talking about. When we started into trying to analyse how do we change speeding behaviour, most people working in road safety said most of our speeding problem is young people being a hoon, seeing what they can do. When you actually go and do surveys of when people speed, the most single common cause of speeding was because I'm late. So we were misunderstanding what the causes were. And that gives us more insight into the breadth of the problem and why enforcement is one of the most powerful ways to do it. But in that process, we do need to point out how much of the community wants these things. And actually, the thing I would really highlight here is the media is a really bad guide to that. The media will go out and put a microphone in front of 5 people's noses and say, do you support speed cameras? And actually, I know because my daughter was one of those people they chose once, do you support speed cameras? And she started saying, well, actually, yes, I do, because the evidence shows she didn't get on TV. All the people who said, no, they're revenue raising, they got on TV. So it's actually a very biased sample presented by the media. And that's also part of the reason why good surveys of attitudes are incredibly important, because they allow us to show the politicians who are worried about who thinks what, that actually most people do support speed management, even though the people you see on media don't. They're the noisy ones. Most people who don't bother saying anything do. And actually then coming back to Nicholas's point about what we can do, this highlights to me one of the things we can do. All of us who want road safety should be writing to our minister, should be writing to our local government, should be pressuring, should be writing to letters to the newspaper saying, this is a good thing. I want speeds managed. It's dangerous not to do this. So that that silent majority who want these things actually becomes a more vocal majority. And that will give us more political leverage and more influence to improve road safety with the measures that are necessary to do it, which are sometimes not seen as politically very viable. But if we all spoke up, I think they would become much more politically acceptable, because we would get to see that silent majority who often want these becoming more vocal. Thanks.
Thank you. Very interesting. It's, in fact, I'm an education expert. So, your point was quite interesting. And then I fully agree with you that the lack of motivation is very key. I mean, not the lack of knowledge. I mean, then also the awareness raising is another, dimensions we really have to focus on. And then, in fact, some of the comments in the Q&A mentioned about good governance and the leadership and so on and so forth. So, you have already touched upon some of the other issues as well in your response. Thank you. Okay, now I'd like to ask Professor Janis.
Yes, thank you very much. I would like to address the question concerning enforcement and education. First of all, to clarify, comparing enforcement and education is an issue that we have to take into account, that enforcement has a direct effect and important effect, which, however, is temporary. When enforcement is there, and after has gone for a while, there is compliance. When enforcement is not there anymore, then compliance gradually is not there. So enforcement, it is very efficient, but still it has to be systematic. And in terms of effectiveness of enforcement, not only it changes behavior because people have to comply with police enforcement and comply to the rules, but most importantly, enforcement, when it is systematic, is the best campaign because it passes the message. I am here to protect you, to demonstrate that not using a helmet is very dangerous, so I give the fines. Whereas the message is totally wrong when there are rules and enforcement is not there. That means this is the worst campaign because people say, if the state, if the authorities do not are not interested for the rules, I'm not interested neither. So it's not a question of having high fines and strict enforcement. It is a question of systematic enforcement, perhaps with low fines, but a lot of fines, in order to demonstrate the importance of the problem through the continuous presence of police wherever there are traffic infractions, and especially focusing on there should be even a priority in the focus of enforcement, mainly talking about the key factors: speeding, drink and drive, mobile phone use, distraction, helmet and seat belt. And then talking about education, of course, in contrast to enforcement, education has a rather long-term effect. It's not for next day. However, this effect is more solid. And if we manage to change the culture, then we progress. I can give you a very short example with the Greek crisis, economic crisis during the last decade, which Greek drivers were obliged to drive with less speeding due to the fuel consumption, due to overall cannot repair in terms in case of an accident. So they changed the behavior in speeding and in aggressive driving. And it is astonishing how this change in behavior remained also after the crisis. So if we manage to change the culture, the behavior, this remains. So this is fundamental in education. However, the question concerning education at schools or something else, I can tell you that the best education program is parents on wheel. I mean, whatever we say to the children at school, they learn how to drive and how to behave on the road, mainly by the example of their parents. How their parents are driving will dictate how children will drive. So I would add that if we want an education program to be effective, it has to be also addressed to the parents, not only of the children. So this is it about enforcement and education. And just a very short last remark. Whatever we do, the key is measuring. We have to measure culture. We have to measure performance. We have to link with specific analysis and studies culture and performance. and to see what works best. And of course, we have to measure the programs and the measures, meaning we have to measure enforcement level. We have to measure training. We have to see the intensification of campaigns in order to see their effect on safety performance and repeat the successful measures and avoid the non-successful measures. So data and measuring is the key, one more key to improve safety culture. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Very interesting comments. Thank you. In fact, there are two comments and questions in the Q&A in Japanese. So I just would like to quickly translate. One comment in Japanese is asking, yes, we recognize the impact of the importance of the enforcement. However, what about the issue of sustainability? Because when you introduce a stronger enforcement, at that point, people follow, but then later on, they may not really continue. So what about the issue of the sustainability? That's one comment in Japanese. And another comment, is there any relation, I mean, in line to the discussion we are having today, do you think there's any impact we can expect by promoting more the automated vehicles? So, if now we are talking about the human to drive basically the vehicles, but if this has been automated, and then that will solve the problems because we are talking about the traffic culture, because culture is very much affected by the humans' beliefs, as Professor Ward explained. But if all the vehicles are basically, driven by the machine, became automated, then is that the solution to the problems we are observing about the street? That's another question in Japanese. Okay, I hope I'm correctly translating, but I hope that's clear to you. Okay, so now I'd like to invite Mr. Mataro for your response.
Thank you. Very quickly, as I see the clock is running very fast. I'd like to respond to that question. Somebody was asking what happens in big cities when there are actually big crowds crossing at the same time. The answer is very simple, is that cascade and amplification processes I was mentioning in my presentation just become bigger and bigger, but also because there's this false feeling of feeling protected by the crowd. I didn't have time in the presentation to go into the details, but if you look at the study that the link is in my presentation, they actually dig into that. And so they were also analyzing not only who was stepping first, but what happened to all those who were standing behind. The second question was about, I think, the issue of privacy and cameras. I personally have almost to laugh a little bit when people start raising issues about privacy, because we all use this, and with this, privacy is gone already. So for me, it's a false debate. What I know from the experience from our members around the world, very often it's more the cost of installing and operating the system that functions as a deterrent for the authorities rather than protecting the privacy. It's a complex system to put in place because it requires changes to the law as well, and it requires resources to run efficiently the system as well. I think there was another point that I wanted to make, and both Professor Ward and Soms were touching upon this issue of the community, and I agree with Soms on the importance of being vocal. Again, I can give a very concrete example of Switzerland. Switzerland has a government whose I would say, has a different vision or very car-centric type of, traditionally very car-centric type of vision. And yet, Geneva, like many other cities, have now 30 kilometers speed default in most of the central roads. Where I live is 30 kilometers per hour. Is it respected in my neighborhood personally? No, for a number of different reasons. Some of them are engineering, and I've been vocal here, so they did some traffic calming downstairs. This just made it worse. Why am I mentioning this? It's despite the fact that there was a certain type of color of government, the community, and this is also very Swiss in a way, because direct democracy is a strong, very strong value in Switzerland. There were a lot of groups which have been vocal, and the parents' associations around the school. So you shouldn't be discouraged for that. And yes, you have to be vocal about the enforcement. And again, the type of people that I see speeding at 50 here, just around the corner where I live, like Soms was saying, they do know. It's not that they can't read this, it's a question of motivation. I know Geneva, the motivation I can tell you is that this is a city which has not been designed for cars. They have been trying to satisfy the request of the community, so there are a lot of slowing down type of measures. As soon as the driver has a bit of space to push on the accelerator, as it is here in my neighborhood, they just do it. So we need to work on that. And finally, how do we work on that motivation? The most successful campaigns that I have seen are those campaigns that make you touch with hand the human drama. Not because you watch it on a video, but they touch with hand, speaking with people who have been involved in crashes with lost people. I've seen one. I'm sure that all the other panelists know it. Instead of just giving a fine, the person who was speeding was obliged to sit in a car. He didn't know. He was sitting in a car and was driving with a group of people when the story of the person is the mother of someone who has been killed. And that experience changes your mind forever. And I'll stop here.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Professor Ward?
I'll touch on a couple of points quickly. The question about automated vehicles, very interesting and relevant topic. As I mentioned in my presentation, we, in North America, to get to our Vision Zero, we recognize that automation does have a role, but it's not looked upon as being the only solution. It's one of the pillars that we use to get to zero. We don't rely on it only by itself. It does bring up some interesting questions about its relationship to traffic safety culture, especially if we're talking about fully automated vehicles. One thing to keep in mind is it can take a very, very long time for fully automated vehicles to be ubiquitous everywhere. So it being a final solution to improve traffic safety is going to take a very long time to get to all of the areas with low resources and insufficient infrastructure to support those kind of vehicles right now. But what's interesting to think about is how will fully automated vehicles contribute to traffic safety culture when there's a mix of automated vehicles and normal manual vehicles. And I guess you can ask two questions in that scenario. When you're programming these automated vehicles, what culture do you give to the technology? What is the values and beliefs of the technology? And is that consistent with the local culture? Using Susanna's example, do you design automated vehicles in Sicily with a Sicilian traffic safety culture, or do you design them with a definitively safe traffic safety culture? It's also interesting to speculate to the extent that we don't recognize which cars are automated, which ones aren't. Can you actually use automated vehicles as probes to model the safe behavior and try and create a new perceived norm for safety. And the other one more comment I'll make, Christo Lipovac asked about attitudes in relation to traffic safety culture, noting that we often talk about attitudes as the main factor in determining behavior. What's the relationship of attitudes and traffic safety culture? I guess a couple of quick points. As Soms pointed out, attitudes do lead to behavior, but it's also true in certain conditions, behavior leads to attitudes. So there's an interesting bidirectional relationship there. But when we think about traffic safety culture, we need to go broader than attitudes. If you look at different models of psychosocial behavior, different models out of psychology on how people make decisions, what kinds of beliefs lead to decisions. And by decisions, we really mean being willing or intending to engage in a behavior. There's a few more key concepts other than attitudes that are involved. And one we've mentioned already, which is norms. And there's two kinds of norms. Is what we think most people do. So that's the kind of behavior we want to model. There's also injunctive norms, which is what we think most people approve of or expect us to do. Sort of the peer pressure kind of concept. That also has a role in traffic safety culture. There's two more. Another one is perceived behavioral control, our sense of our ability to change our destiny, to change our behavior. And that's an interesting concept when you look at countries that have a very fatalistic kind of culture where, you know, things happen outside of their control. They can't prevent or change anything. Crashes are going to happen. They have a very different perspective, as Soames mentioned, on traffic safety. And the last kind of concept that you can talk about is what's called the prototypical or prototype image. What do we think of people who normally do this behavior? What are attitudes or beliefs about people who always speed? Is it a positive attitude or a negative attitude? If we perceive the person who always does dangerous behavior in a positive way, we're more likely to do it. However, if we see people who never do a risky behavior in a negative way, we're less likely to do it. So when we imagine people who typically do these behaviors, that kind of belief also influences our behavior. So there's quite a few types of beliefs which form our decision making and are part of traffic safety culture. And to give us a very broad set of possible strategies to change behavior, we need to recognize the role of all these different kinds of beliefs, not just attitudes.
Thank you very much for your very inspiring comments and discussions. Unfortunately, now we are running out of our time, and but you know, I really like to. There are so many things, you know. I actually learned so much today. I myself really, this was a really learning opportunity for me, and eye-opening as well, because in EATS we have been discussing about the balance. I mean, how we can see the triangle of engineering, enforcement, and education from the perspective of the traffic safety culture, and then your discussions really, you know, tells us we have so much more to discuss. Because, for instance, you know, thinking of the target and strategy to realize the more traffic safety society. But if we don't understand the foundations that Professor Ward mentioned in your presentations, you know, the foundation, which we consider the traffic safety culture, our target or strategy may not really make sense in the context of that society. So we really need to think further. And then, in fact, the EATS has been involved in the ESRA. The Professor Giannis has been leading as well. And then in that kind of international comparison really tells us what sort of aspects we are not really looking at yet from the Japanese perspective. So again, you know, we learned quite a lot from Dr. Job, from your very comprehensive data. And then we really need to understand more based on the data, and then we have to do more complete analysis based on the data which is still the missing on us. And then Ms. Mataro, thank you very much for sharing such inspiring stories. I mean, I know that you have such a wide experiences of different, learning, I mean, about the traffic safety. And again, your stories really open our eyes. So this is the sixth forum, and then we really like to continue. So we haven't concluded. I cannot really conclude. I mean, our discussion because your discussion was so rich and so much thought-provoking. So we will carry on our discussions. So I hope we can stay in touch, and then we can also meet again, either virtually but hopefully physically. And also, I would like to really express our appreciation to the active participation of the viewers who really addressed the interesting and important questions and comments. So thank you very much for the discussions. And then again, we will continue our forum because this is a network we really consider very important as IATS. And then you are now our friends. So we like to, we hope our friendship lasts long, and which will become very, very fruitful as well. So again, to all the honorable speakers, thank you very much for your very inspiring lectures and very, very rich discussions, and hope to see you again. And then, so this is the end of the session. Thank you very much. Thank you.
We thank you a lot. We thank you a lot.
Arigato. Arigato.
Arigato.
Arigato.
Arigato. Thank you.
Arigato.
Thank you very much, Dr.
Hello.
Kitamura, and everyone on the panel. Thank you very much.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Lastly, Mr. Satoshi Kamada, IATS Executive Director, will give a closing address.
I'm Satoshi Kamada, Executive Director of IATS in Tokyo. Thank you for participating in the 6th GIFT Symposium today. It seems about 300 people have participated in this event, and maybe more than half of them are from overseas. I would also like to express my gratitude to the distinguished panelists for their great contribution. This time, we invited panelists who are involved in research or practical work on road safety from global perspectives, and we tried to develop discussion from traffic culture to more realistic initiatives using keywords such as unsafe behavior. Discussion time was very much limited, but I think it contains many, many clues to think about global road safety. In our association, we plan to proceed to more concrete discussions based on today's symposium. And we would like to develop those discussions to road safety initiatives, especially in developing countries. IATS was founded by two founders of Honda Motor Company 46 years ago, and has developed a wide range of activities from the high standpoint, aiming for an ideal transportation society without being bound by the realm of cars. We are not such a big organization, and there may be a limit to what we can do, but we are working on our activities with strong will to contribute to society through international and interdisciplinary, transdisciplinary approach. We would like to continue discussions like today's symposium further on, and we hope to develop collaborations with various researchers and related organizations. At the end, I would like to express my gratitude again to all people who have cooperated in holding today's symposium. Thank you very much indeed, everyone.
Thank you. This is the end of the symposium, Diversity in Traffic Culture and Unsafe Behavior of the 6th Global Interactive Forum on Traffic and Safety 2020. Today's session will be archived and streamed again. Details will be published on the website on a later date. After the forum, a survey form will be sent to your registered email address. Your opinions will be reflected in future gifts, so we ask for your participation. Thank you so much for watching today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye, everyone.